Thank you, Professor Hips. Well, it is an honor to be here presenting at the National Conference on Undergraduate Research, even in this virtual setting. But before I get into things, we're actually going to start with a little video.
His work in exposing wrongdoing. There is one thing in life we all know for sure: death. Yet for Julian Assange, there's a second: persecution. Julian Assange is an Australian national and world-renowned watchdog journalist. The winner of almost 20 awards, Assange has been honored by publications and organizations such as The Economist, Time Magazine, and the People's Choice Awards. His work in exposing wrongdoing can be compared to few, but the United States has silenced Assange. While Assange lays dying in a London jail, U.S. prosecutors baselessly attempt to extradite him to charge him with crimes under a law intended for government employees. The persecution and prosecution of Assange should scare anyone. Journalists are needed in this world. Journalists expose wrongdoing. They call out corruption. But the United States has now begun to attempt to silence the truth. This is Jail, Julian Assange, and the Future of Watchdog Journalism.
So we will go ahead and get started. So as I said, and as Professor Hips said, my name is Joe Moronsky. I'm a student at High Point University here in High Point, North Carolina. I'm a journalism and political science dual degree student with a minor in Italian studies from Miller Place, New York, which is out on Long Island. And I'm really focusing on investigative journalism, with my main piece recently being a study on the mental health effects of COVID-19 on LGBTQ plus youth in specific. Before we get into things, we do have to define a couple terms just so things make more sense throughout this presentation. So first of all, a significant activity report. Now, this is a report which is often filed early after an event, and it logs what happened. So this could be a kidnapping, maybe a bombing, or something else going on during war. There's a detainee assessment brief, which is a brief that commanders file, and this essentially outlines the risk of releasing a prisoner into society, both to the United States and its allies. Guantanamo Bay is a camp that was established by President George W. Bush in 2002 during the War on Terror, and it holds some high-profile prisoners seen as threats to the United States. It's also referred to in many court proceedings as GITMO, or GTMO. And lastly, watchdog journalism. Now, this is journalism that focuses on exposing wrongdoing in the government or in companies, a lot of times through talking to people, interviewing people, and learning some more about what might be going on. This is also one of the most protected forms of journalism due to the fact that it is designed to expose corruption. So you saw a little bit about Julian Assange in that video, but who is he? Julian Assange has been the public face and editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks since at least 2007. He's responsible for exposing war crimes, government abuses, and much more, with his most notable piece being called Collateral Murder. This is a video that was in that previous video, just a snippet, and it essentially shows a helicopter taking out a Reuters reporter and some citizens and then laughing about it. This went on to become a very infamous video. He's also responsible for the leaks of Hillary Clinton's emails in 2016, and it's important to note that he's an Australian national born and raised in Australia. So let's talk about what led to this point. Before we can talk about what's currently going on, we need to understand the history. So Assange worked closely with somebody by the name of Chelsea Manning, then Brady Manning, and he gained access to Army intelligence. Manning worked as an Army intelligence analyst in Iraq and communicated with Assange via Jabber, which is a secure communication site. They talked for months on end and used the WikiLeaks Most Wanted list to find different things that could help Assange. Assange then took these and released them using WikiLeaks. These were plenty of things which we'll get into in a little bit. Like I said, plenty of things. So let's break down the numbers a little bit. Manning provided Assange with approximately 90,000 Afghanistan war related significant activity reports, approximately 400,000 Iraq war related significant activity reports, approximately 800 Guantanamo Bay detainee assessment briefs, and approximately 250,000 US Department of State cables. So, due to an executive order issued by President Obama, number 13526, most of the documents that Manning provided to Assange were classified up to the secret level, but Manning held a top secret security clearance, which is higher than a secret level, therefore giving Manning access to these documents. Under the Obama administration, an investigation was opened into these leaks. However, it was halted due to the implications of prosecuting a foreign journalist. In 2016, the Trump administration reopened the investigation into the Manning and Assange leaks. Former CIA Director Mike Pompeo has been quoted as saying, "We have to recognize that we can no longer allow Assange and his colleagues the latitude to use free speech values against us." This has always been a very controversial investigation, more so in the present time where journalists are being hailed for some of their work, exposing wrongdoings in things such as police departments and the criminal justice system. So, like I said, the Obama administration did make the decision to halt this investigation. It was expected that the Biden administration would halt this investigation, but they have not. In fact, things have continued. During the initial investigation, Assange sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, but was eventually forced out when a new president took power in Ecuador. He was there for about 7 years before he was forced to leave. But when he was seeking refuge in there, the CIA and other intelligence agencies did spy on him through cameras and other forms of technology. Now, the video footage of Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy that you saw in that initial video actually is CIA footage of the CIA spying on him. That includes conversations with his lawyer, which is a clear violation of the Fifth Amendment. Upon being forced out, he was arrested and has remained in prison ever since. You saw some of the footage of him being forced out of the Ecuadorian embassy, where he was in fact carried out by the royal police and refused to go out on his own. So let's talk about the indictment against Assange. It is long, to say the least, hundreds of pages, and there's 18 charges against Assange under the Espionage Act of 1917. One count of conspiracy to access a computer without authorization in exceeding authorized access to obtain classified national defense information. One count of conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defense information. One count of conspiracy to commit computer intrusions. 6 counts of obtaining national defense information, and 9 counts of disclosure of national defense information. But what is the Espionage Act of 1917? So this act was designed to prevent government employees from sharing national security information. It was written during World War I and the Red Scare, which was the Communist Party infiltrating the United States and the attempt to get rid of it. The counterpart to the Espionage Act was the Sedition Act of 1918, which extended the penalties under the Espionage Act to private citizens. But Congress eventually repealed this in 1920, realizing the implications it had against the First Amendment. Present day, a lot is going on. This is an evolving case. Judges' decisions are coming down daily, and the trial is still ongoing. Assange is currently locked in a maximum security prison in London, and he is in isolation. Now, this is called HMP Belmarsh, and it's one of the most secure prisons in all of London. His doctor has stated he will not live much longer due to the isolation and conditions he is facing. The United States is currently trying to extradite Assange so he can be tried in the United States, but a London judge issued a 132-page ruling in January that denied this request. The judge wrote, quote, "Faced with the conditions of near total isolation without the protective factors which limited his risk at HMP Belmarsh, I am satisfied that the procedures described by the US will not prevent Mr. Assange from finding a way to commit suicide. And for this reason, I have decided extradition would be oppressive by reason of mental harm, end quote. Now, the United States is appealing this decision, and the judge did rule that Assange must remain in custody while the appeals are being played out due to the fact that he did run for 7 years and seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy. But Assange has a lot of defense avenues, so things are very vague. Chelsea Manning was convicted of 17 of the 22 counts she was charged with in July of 2013, sentenced to 35 years in prison, and then that was eventually commuted by President Obama, and Manning was released in 2017. Manning was charged under the Espionage Act of 1917. Now, that is important to note. Manning was an analyst for the Army. That makes Manning a government employee. So therefore, she can be charged under the Espionage Act. But Assange is not a US citizen, not a government employee, and can't be charged under the Espionage Act. Like I said, he's an Australian citizen, born in Australia, raised in Australia. So to charge somebody under this act is something that has never been done before. If that doesn't work, though, he does have two more defense avenues. Precedent. There's plenty of cases from the Supreme Court which weigh in on this. The New York Times versus United States is also referred to as the Pentagon Papers case, and this is something that most journalists know. Most every journalist knows this case. It really stated that journalists can't be punished for publishing information they didn't get. This is a little bit of a tricky and complex defense for Assange, though. Yes, he did work to get these documents with Manning. Yes, he did coerce Manning to give him these documents. However, all good watchdog journalists coerce and build trust with their sources. That's how you get information, and that's how you can create a report. And then there's also Bartnicki v. Voper, which was a 2001 civil case. A radio host aired an illegally recorded phone call, but the court stated that, quote, the First Amendment protects the disclosure of illegally intercepted communications by parties who did not participate in the illegal interception. Again, Assange didn't hack into government systems. Assange didn't download the documents himself. Manning did all of that. And so things are very complex in this case. And then the last defense avenue that Assange can take is mens rea, or guilty mind, also known as intent. When charges were brought against two employees of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, also known as AIPAC or IPAC, they were eventually dropped, and the court said that the prosecution must prove intent to harm the United States and its security. Assange has been abundantly clear from the very beginning that he wasn't seeking to harm the United States or its security, but rather expose the wrongdoings occurring in overseas wars. Let's talk the implications of this conviction should it go through. Things are looking down for journalism if Assange is convicted. First of all, there'll be less accountability. Journalists will now be able to be prosecuted using the simple phrase national security. Justice Hugo Black once weighed in on this issue, saying that national security is way too vague of a term. What defines national security and what makes national security is not clear. It's not written in any amendment or the Constitution. So the court will be forced to determine what national security means. He also has the possibility of devaluing the First Amendment. The court will now say that in the name of national security, the First Amendment doesn't apply to journalists. The First Amendment doesn't apply to anybody. Just because we're starting with the press doesn't mean that this won't extend, because the First Amendment covers freedom of speech, freedom of protest, freedom of religion. There's a lot of freedoms protected by the First Amendment that are under attack. This opens the door for prosecution for journalists across the country, and we have seen that recently. Most notably, a journalist was prosecuted for being at a Black Lives Matter protest this summer. Eventually, the jury found the journalist not guilty, but that was a trial that happened just a few months ago, and the verdict just came out a few weeks ago. So journalists are already being prosecuted for things that they should be protected with doing. And lastly, foreign journalists might not have protection. Assange is an Australian national. We've said that throughout this presentation. But what are the implications for American journalists overseas if countries see the United States prosecuting foreign journalists? This is a very complex case. This is not an open and shut case. The United States still needs to get Assange to the United States to prosecute him. But this is a very important case and one we should all be watching. Journalism is key to the United States. Journalism is key to the accountability of our government, and it is something that we need. Everybody should be watching this case because the way that this unfolds will be a precursor for years to come. Thank you for listening in on my presentation on jail Julian Assange and the future of watchdog journalism. Like I said, this is a very ongoing matter, a constantly evolving issue. So I encourage you, please stay up to date. And I know that I'll continue to cover this story. My contact information is on the screen, and I'd love to connect.